Friends and travelers, however you've arrived, I bid you welcome. Here at Let's Be Frank, we're about lives, and above all, living well. But I don't suppose a podcast hosted by Benjamin Franklin could be about anything else. In my lifetime, I pursued the practice of moral improvement like a science, recording my successes, and yes, oftentimes reveling in my failings. It's my hope, with our weekly almanac, to deliver to a curious world delicious morsels of history in quick, easy to digest installments, perfect for a sit in your favorite chair or a morning walk to work. At the end of each installment, I like to wrap it up in a neat little lesson you can apply to your own life, taken from the events, stories, and personalities shared in each episode. So sit back, relax, and together, let's make history.
Greetings and salutations, dear listener. Welcome to another installment of Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind with me, your faithful friend and host, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer. Follow B. Franklin live across our various social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at B. Franklin Live. Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind. If you love the wit and wisdom of Let's Be Frank and wish to become involved in the history that we try to make every day, consider following our Patreon for free or even pledge to become a member of our Junto and make history with us. My dear friends, it's been a historic week this May of 2024. What was going on in my life 250 years ago today? That answer can be found in this week's edition of This Past Week. This Past Week is a Patreon exclusive piece of content where every week I read a letter from Dr. Benjamin Franklin from the week our show debuts. This week's edition comes from none other than America's favorite fighting Frenchman, the Marquis de Lafayette. From 1781, in May of that year, the unconditional surrender of Southern forces at Yorktown was far on the horizon. Lafayette was in the Southern theater of war, giving a merry chase to the forces of Benedict Arnold, Cornwallis, O'Hara, and the like, with other generals like Mad Anthony Wayne. This letter corresponds with movements abroad. I still being in residence in Passy, France. To hear the full reading of this exciting letter, subscribe to our Patreon and help us make more history. Now, with that out of the way, we can get to today's installment. For purposes of good order, this podcast is composed of several primary sources associated with Ben Franklin's life, knit together to collect it all into one narrative on a cohesive theme. Today's narrative is the second part of this season's primary theme. Snatching Lightning, a brief history of electric experimentation that will reach its finale on the anniversary of my faithful kite experiment, which has left a perpetual char mark upon the pages of science and history. On Snatching Lightning Part 1, we travel to the ancient world to discuss the early electrical experiments of Thales of Milesia, generating static electricity. We discussed William Gilbert and Thomas Brown and set the stage for my initiation into the art of making electricity. So where does the baton move between Brown and myself? In 1660, Otto von Guericke described and demonstrated a vacuum and then invented a machine that produced static electricity. In 1675, Stephen Gray distinguished between conductors and non-conductors of electric charges. Between 1745 and 1746, right before I enter stage right, George von Kleist developed the first electric capacitor, a device for storing electricity, the Leyden jar. Now we'll pick up, my beloved Junto, with what I say in my own words regarding my involvement with electricity. Before I proceed in relating the part I had in public affairs under this new governor's administration, it may not be amiss here to give some account of the rise and progress of my philosophical reputation. In 1746, being at Boston, I met there with a Mr. Dr. Spence, who was lately arrived from Scotland, and showed me some electric experiments. They were imperfectly performed, as he was not very expert, but being on a subject quite new to me, they equally surprised and pleased me. Soon after my return to Philadelphia, our library company received from Mr. Peter Collinson, my dear friend in London, Fellow of the Royal Society of London, a present of a glass tube with some account of use of it making such experiments. I eagerly seized the opportunity of repeating what I had seen in Boston, and by much practice acquired great readiness in performing those, also which we had an account of from England, adding a number of new ones. I say much practice, for my house was continually full for some time with people who came to see these new wonders. To divide a little this encumbrance among my friends, I caused a number of similar tubes to be blown at our glass house, which they furnished themselves, so that we had at length several performers. Among these the principal was Mr. Kinnersley, an ingenious neighbour, who, being out of business, I encouraged to undertake showing the experiments for money, and drew up for him 2 lectures, in which the experiments were ranged in such order, and accompanied with such explanations in such method, as that the foregoing should assist in purpose, in which all the little machines that I had roughly made for myself were nicely formed by instrument makers. His lectures were well attended, and gave great satisfaction, and after some time he went through the colonies, exhibiting them in every capital town, and picked up some money. In the West India Islands, indeed, it was with great difficulty the experiments could be made, from the general moisture of the air. Obliged as we were to Mr. Collinson for his present of the tube, etc., I thought it right he should be informed of our success in using it, and wrote him several letters containing accounts of our experiments. Now, the following, my friends, is an account of one of those letters which would be presented at the Royal Academy. Sir, I now send you some further experiments and observations in electricity made in Philadelphia, 1748, viz. 1. There will be the same explosion and shock if the electrified file is held by one hand by the hook and the coating touched by the other, as when held by the coating and touched at the hook. 2. To take the charged file safely by the hook and not at the same time diminish its force, it must be first set down on an electric per se. 3. The file will be electrified as strongly if held by the hook and the coating applied to the globe or tube as when held by the coating and the hook applied. 4. But the direction of the electrical fire, being different in charging, will also be different in the explosion. The bottle charged through the hook will be discharged through the hook. The bottle charged through the coating will be discharged through the coating, but not otherwise, for the fire must come out the same way it went in. 5. To prove this, take 2 bottles that were equally charged through the hooks, one in each hand, bring their hooks near each other, and no spark or shock will follow, because each hook is disposed to give fire, and neither to receive it. Set one of the bottles down on glass, take it up by the hook, and apply its coating to the hook of the other, and there will be an explosion and shock, and both bottles will be discharged. 6. Vary the experiment by charging 2 files equally, one through the hook, the other through the coating. Hold that by the coating which was charged through the hook, and that by the hook which was charged through the coating. Apply the hook of the first to the coating of the other, and there will be no shock or spark. Set that down on glass which you held by the hook, take it up by the coating, and bring the 2 hooks together. A spark and shock will follow, and both files will be discharged. Your eyes might be crossed at this point, dear listener, and I don't blame you. It's a good deal to explain. But what I'm exploring in this account are positive charges and negative charges, which previously were thought to be 2 different types of electric fluid. What I will inevitably prove with these experiments is that all are electricity, and that certain instances repel while others attract. The devices that I'm speaking of are Leyden jars and conductors, and different ways in which electricity is drawn. I speak at length about how these things are conducted, how files are charged and discharged, but what it will inevitably culminate in is the coinage of a term that I think even you to this day are quite familiar with, dear listener, and that is found here. Upon this we made what we called an electrical battery, consisting of 11 planes of large sash glass armed with thin leaden plates pasted on each side, placed vertically and supported at 2 inches distance on silk cords, with hooks of thick leaden wire, one for each side standing upright, distant from each other, and convenient communications of wire and chain from the giving side of the pane to the receiving side of the other, that so the whole might be charged together, and with the same labor as one single pane, and another contrivance to bring the giving sides after charging in contact with one long wire, and the receivers with another, which two long wires would give the force of all the plates of glass at once through the body of any animal forming the circle with them. The plates may also be discharged separately, or any number together that is required. But this machine is not much used, as not perfectly answering our intention with regard to the ease of charging. We made also of large glass panes magical pictures and self-moving animated wheels, presently to be described. The magical picture is made thus, having a large mezzotinto with a frame and glass, suppose of the king, God preserve him. Take out, how interesting that I said that. The king, God preserve them. Oh, hindsight, I suppose, as you say, is 20/20. Take out the print and cut a panel out of it, near 2 inches all around distant from the frame. If the cut is through the picture, 'tis not the worse. With thin paste or gum water, fix the border that is cut off on the inside of the glass, pressing it smooth, then fill up the vacancy by gilding the glass well with leaf gold or brass. Gild likewise the inner edge of the back of the frame all around except the top part, and form a communication between that gilding and the gilding behind the glass. Then put in the board, and that side is finished. Turn up the glass, and gild the foreside exactly over the back gilding, and when this is dry, cover it by pasting on the panel of the picture that has been cut, observing to bring the corresponding parts of the border and picture together, by which the picture will appear of a piece as at first, only part is behind the glass and part before. Hold the picture horizontally by the top, and place a little movable gilt crown on the king's head. If now the picture be moderately electrified, and another person take hold of the frame with one hand so that the fingers touch inside the gilding, and with the other hand endeavor to take off the crown, it will receive a terrible blow and fail in the attempt. If the picture were highly charged, the consequence might perhaps be as fatal as that of high treason. These experiments with electricity often end in electric shock, and it was around this particular time at a dinner party that, undertaking one of my electrical devices, I sought by means to electrify a turkey and inevitably took the charge within myself. It was these various experiments that made me realize the devastating power of electricity, but also a growing hypothesis that the electricity we keenly felt in these experiments was similar to the lightning we saw within the air. By 1750, in addition to wanting to prove that lightning was electricity, I began to think about protecting people, buildings, and other structures from lightning. This grew into my inevitable idea for the lightning rod. Realizing that electricity was drawn to specific metal points far more than rounded and blunt ones, I began to devise a rod 8 or 10 feet in length, sharpened to a point at the end. I wrote the electrical fire would, I think, be drawn out of a cloud silently before it could come near enough to strike. I wrote that may not the knowledge of this power of points be of use to mankind in preserving houses, churches, ships from the stroke of lightning, by directing us to fix on the highest parts of those edifices upright rods of iron made sharp as a needle. Would not these pointed rods probably draw the electrical fire silently out of a cloud before it came nigh enough to strike, and thereby secure us from that most sudden and terrible mischief? My beloved Junto, it was incredibly effective, and even called by some sorcery. Indeed, an earthquake that shook New England some years later would be blamed upon my electrical innovations, saying the frequency of my lightning rod disturbing the terra firma of the earth would cause the very ground to shake, and the ire of the Almighty. These experiments would continue, and our finale of the experiment with the key and the kite remains just around the corner. My dear friends, a storm is brewing, and I cannot wait to see it transpire. The rest for now remains to be continued. Now, what lesson can we derive from today's installment? My friends, I am a man who seems, in the course of my life, to be bestowed with all the answers, to be bestowed with nothing but wisdom. But I am a man who, in the course of my life, has seen hardships, a great number of hardships. I am someone who, over the course of my life, did not often comport myself well. I have seen, in many times, many storm clouds on the horizon. And so the lesson for today's installment, my dear friends, is to find the lightning rods in your own life. When storms are on the horizon, when you feel in those desperate instances that you will be swallowed by the tempests, the slings, and arrows, secure for yourself the one thing that you might raise to the heavens and dissipate calamity. Surround yourself in your life with the things, with the people, with the practices that might keep you grounded when storms are near. That's all for today's installment. Would that we had more hours in the day, but as always, we have nothing but time between us. Resource materials and images from this week's episode can be found in the journal section of B. Franklin Live. If you like the show, subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest wisdom, and do me the kindness of leaving a review. And my beloved friends, spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbors, tell your horse, I don't care. Let's make our intellectual junto grow. And now, my friends, our time together must come to an end. Fare thee well. And always remember, when you're good to others, you are best to yourselves. Until we meet again, I remain your humble and obedient servant, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer. Stay curious, my friends.